A new NotebookLM audio creation for the Lugalis Sidgmal Thread story sketch. Welcome back to another exciting NotebookLM synthetic conversation between two AI voices. I still like the Bob and Alice names, my own construction, who talk about my submission of the Lugalis Sidgmal Thread story sketch, a part of the stories of Atlantis' larger set of ideas and storyline. All praise Robert McKee, bended knees on small carpet-looking rectangles of cloth. You get the picture, right? Okay, so NotebookLM is still in beta. I am dying for the video editions, and the AI still gets things wrong at times, so I will attempt to add some text boxes to the Clipchamp publishing of this audio. Do enjoy, and as YouTube seems to demand, please like, share, and subscribe. I hate including this, it seems so plebeian. I would rather take the path of my kind of hero, Andrew Camarada, truly a self-made man, provide good content without the advertisements. So, without further ado.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive that takes the familiar myth of Atlantis and completely, flips it on its head.
Yeah, it really does.
You might think of Atlantis as, a city swallowed by the waves, maybe a cautionary tale about pride, something like that.
The Plato version.
Exactly. But the material we're looking at today presents something far more complex. We're talking about a technologically advanced society, deeply intertwined with, maybe even, ultimately controlled by alien species.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to explore this world not from the perspective of its kings or priests or whoever you usually focus on.
No, this is different.
We're seeing it through the eyes of the man who built its infrastructure, who held significant power within its pretty rigid structure, its chief engineer.
And the basis for this specific exploration is, it's a fascinating document, actually.
Yeah.
We're working from these initial pages titled Excerpts from the Lugalis Sidgmal Side of the Story of Atlantis by Alan Lee Whiteman. And what's really crucial to understand about this source, right from the start, is its intended audience. It's explicitly described as material meant for film scriptwriters.
Ah, okay, so it's visual.
Very visual. It's presented as a sketch, like a snapshot, focusing intensely on this one character's perspective, Lugalis Sidgmal, as part of a bigger work in progress.
Right.
So when we talk about details or descriptions, even potential camera angles that get mentioned.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're engaging directly with notes designed to help someone visualize this story on screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a history textbook, it's narrative building blocks.
Gotcha. And this character, Lugalis Sidgmal, he's our guide. His name is interesting in itself, isn't it?
It really is. The source tells us it's derived from Sumerian roots, Lugalis being close to chief or king, and Sidgmal approximating builder.
Builder, so chief builder.
Essentially, yeah. Since the concept of engineer, as we understand it, didn't really exist in those Sumerian terms, chief builder is basically the title he held, the chief engineer.
And there's a little detail the source adds, which tells you something about their society.
What does it say?
That top officials, people like him, they were addressed by their job titles. Not like Lugalis Sidgmal, but chief engineer. No personal names combined with family or clan names in formal address.
Huh. Very hierarchical, very role-focused.
Yeah. Though apparently he did have a personal nickname among his circle, LG.
LG, okay.
So our mission in this deep dive is pretty clear then. We're going to immerse ourselves in these initial pages from Whiteman's work.
Right.
We'll pull out the critical details about this version of Atlantis, its unique characteristics, the alien involvement, the tech, the society.
But most importantly, we'll trace the complex journey and really a multifaceted role of Lugalis Sidgmal, interpreting everything strictly through the lens of this source material, these notes, for a potentially, visually compelling narrative.
Okay, let's dive deep into the man himself then. Who exactly is Lugalis Sidgmal within this specific sketched narrative? The source gives us a bit of a window into his background, his lineage.
Well, first off, he wasn't the first chief engineer. He was a later son, inheriting the mantle, so to speak, from his father, Lugalis Sidgmal.
Lugalis Sidgmal.
Known as AG. And the source notes that AG was a master, particularly skilled in understanding and applying power crystals.
Ah, power crystals. Okay, that sounds important. The source touches on their function, right? Sounds pretty foundational to their tech.
Absolutely foundational. They could apparently harness energy from the zero-point vacuum.
Zero-point vacuum, okay, that's advanced physics territory.
Definitely hints at something beyond our current grasp.
Yeah.
And these crystals could store that energy and then convert it into both AC and DC electricity.
So, like, the ultimate batteries and power converters all rolled into one, drawing from the fabric of space itself.
That's the implication, yeah. Think of them as the core energy source for their entire infrastructure. Now, Lugalis Sidgmal, he wasn't the eldest son.
Right, he had older brothers.
He did. But for reasons the source kind of briefly touches on, maybe they weren't interested, maybe they weren't suitable, or, and this seems crucial, the Nephilim, the dominant alien presence we'll talk more about, didn't approve of him.
Ah, so alien politics played a role even in succession.
Seems like it. So, the role passed to Lugalis. He stepped into this position of just immense power and responsibility that his father, AG, had held.
And immense power and responsibility really feels like an understatement based on how the source describes his role. It wasn't just about, building stuff.
Not at all. The source sketches out this whole spectrum of responsibilities. It even links them to potential temperament biases, which is fascinating from a character development angle, like for a script.
Okay, like what?
Well, first, there's the strategic mind, the architect, suggested as an INTJ temperament.
INTJ, okay.
This involved high-level design stuff like planning for population relocation technology, even before the main Atlantis story we're seeing here.
Yeah.
So, big picture thinking.
Got it. Strategy. Then what?
Then came the massive hands-on tasks. The civil engineer role, linked maybe to an IPJ bias.
More practical.
Yeah, this covered traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings.
Yeah.
But the source really emphasizes his primary responsibility: the huge excavation and construction of the transport device complex.
The TD complex. This sounds central.
It is. We're talking the hangar itself, which was enormous. All the connecting corridors, rooms, control centers, the massive doors, everything needed to house and operate this key piece of technology.
Okay, so architect, civil engineer. What else?
He was also the electrical engineer, another INTJ facet suggested. Solely responsible for establishing and maintaining the entire power grid and telecommunications network.
Which, in a world running on these zero-point crystals and alien tech, that's got to be a constant, vital job.
Absolute critical. Non-stop, probably.
Yeah.
But here's where the role takes a sharp turn from just being technical.
Okay.
The chief engineer held significant political sway. The source describes him as a politician, maybe linked to an ESXP temperament.
ESXP, interesting contrast.
Yeah. And get this. He held one of only 3 seats on the ruling council.
3 seats, that's
Yeah.
very concentrated power.
And this council, the source is really explicit here, it wasn't a democracy. Not even close. It was an authoritarian semi-dictatorship governing the KA citizens.
So the people of this Atlantis.
Right. And this society functioned, in the source's own words, more like a military arm of the Nephilim presence.
Wow. Okay, so he's not just building things, he's ruling and essentially enforcing the will of an alien power.
Exactly. That council position just fundamentally changes the stakes. He's accountable for engineering, yes, but also for political decisions within this authoritarian structure.
Yeah.
And this extended to his administrative duties, too. A CEO-like function, maybe ESTX suggested.
Managing the whole operation.
A vast workforce, section heads, even a group doing something like HR functions.
But wait, here's a detail that makes this society sound truly alien in its setup. The source says, no money.
Correct. No traditional payroll, no currency as we know it. People didn't work for wages.
So what did they work for?
Their compensation came in basically 3 forms. Food, their position within the hierarchy status, essentially in extraordinarily long lifespans.
How long?
The source specifies over 10,000 years.
10,000 years. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of compensation package.
Radically different economic and social model, right? Your whole motivation shifts completely when money isn't the goal. Status, sustenance, and, well, near immortality were the driving forces.
Incredible. And there's one more hat he wore.
One more crucial one. He had to be a scientist, linked perhaps to an INTP bias.
INTP, okay.
And this wasn't just following blueprints. He needed an innate, deep understanding of complex alien technology to diagnose problems, troubleshoot issues, figure out repairs, how to operate things.
So not just managing, but actively problem-solving on a high-tech, potentially non-human tech level.
Exactly. And the source adds this really intriguing note here. Much of his fundamental knowledge might have come from memories of previous lives.
Past life memories.
Specifically, lives spent working on the Nephilim population transfer problem during some earlier cycle or era.
Okay, wow. Let's just, pause and absorb that for a second.
That's a lot.
This one guy, Lugalis Sidgmal, LG, he's expected to be an architect, a civil engineer, an electrical engineer, A politician on a 3-person ruling council, a huge administrator running a moneyless workforce, and a scientist troubleshooting alien tech, possibly drawing on past life memories.
All at the same time.
Managing infrastructure, political power, scientific puzzles, all within this rigid, alien-influenced, non-democratic system where the very structure of work and life is just fundamentally different from anything we know.
What stands out to you about that combination? I mean, imagine the cognitive load.
Oh, completely. The stress alone.
And the ethical tightropes, right?
Yeah.
You're responsible for the physical stability of society, the power grid communication, and you're helping enforce the rule of alien overlords while trying to solve engineering problems that might need you to tap into, like ancient non-human knowledge from past lives.
Yeah, it makes, modern CEO or even high-level government roles look almost simple by comparison.
It's definitely on another level entirely.
And that whole idea of working for position and extreme longevity instead of money, it removes a key lever of control and motivation we're just so used to. What kind of society does that structure actually create?
That's a great question.
Is there room for individual ambition beyond just climbing the ladder? Does it foster loyalty? Or maybe deep resentment? The source presents it factually, but the implications for, human behavior, social dynamics, they're huge. It's a total reshaping of the social contract.
Definitely. So moving beyond the individual, let's try and sketch out the world he lived in based on these excerpts. Because this is not Plato's Atlantis sinking somewhere out the Atlantic Ocean.
No, the source gives it a very specific location. Where was it again?
The Red Sea.
The Red Sea. Okay, interesting choice. And this base on Earth wasn't isolated, was it? It was linked to something in orbit.
That's right. He was connected to a space station. The station was positioned in synchronous orbit, directly above a location referred to as the underneath.
The underneath. And the source identifies that as?
Present-day Kenya, specifically on the equator.
Okay, so Red Sea base, orbital station over Kenya. And the station was important because
it housed the peer device.
Yeah.
This is essential for operating the transport device, LG's big project. Think of the peer device as the necessary counterpart technology up in orbit that made the surface-to-orbit transport possible, like one half of the system.
Got it. And who were the players in this world? The source describes a pretty interesting mix of inhabitants and influencing forces.
Yeah, it's quite a cast. At the core, you had the Ka Atlantean people.
Ka Atlanteans.
The source describes them as pre-fall Ka-era Anunnaki, which sounds like,
well,
genetically enhanced humans.
Yeah.
Created by the Nephilim.
Created by the Nephilim. So they're constructs in a way.
Seems like it. The source notes they had some resemblance to post-fall figures from, Sumerian mythology like Enlil, Ea Enki, but it also clarifies that this specific link isn't really the main focus of this particular story sketch. It does mention, though, kind of ominously, that these Anunnaki had their own problems down the line, issues with inbreeding, leading to a diminished, dying-out population eventually. But that's perhaps later than our story here.
So a ruling class that's a product of alien genetic engineering, and the architects of that engineering, the Nephilim, they were the dominant alien group.
Definitely portrayed as They were deeply involved in, well, everything. The creation of the Ka people, the running of Atlantis, and, as it's hinted, potentially its destruction too.
Right.
The source mentions there's a whole separate narrative thread from their perspective called the Nephilim thread. Their duties apparently included things like migration logistics and something called uplift.
Uplift. Now, the source flags that term, doesn't it? References David Brin's science fiction.
It does, yeah.
Right.
Which usually suggests the idea of bringing other species to a higher state of development, technologically or intellectually.
But in this context, given the genetic engineering and, well, some other elements we'll get to, it feels like it might carry some complex connotations here. Maybe not entirely positive.
I think that's a fair assumption. It does feel loaded. And the source introduces another distinct alien interest into the mix. The Pleiadians.
Pleiadians. Okay, another group.
And it specifically states they had interests separate from those of humanity. This seems like a small detail at first, but it becomes really significant later in Lugalis' story arc.
Okay, so Nephilim in charge. Pleiadians with their own agenda. Who else?
Then there were the genetically unenhanced humans. Just regular humans, as we might understand them.
Baseline humans.
Exactly. And the source makes a pretty chilling note about them. They were targeted by an emotion harvesting machine.
Emotion harvesting? What does that even mean?
It's not fully detailed in these excerpts, but the implication is deeply disturbing. Extracting or feeding off human emotions somehow. And crucially, this machine was put into service after the transport device installation.
Wow. Okay, that's dark.
It's profoundly dark. And this might tie into another group mentioned, the Order of the Self.
Order of the Self.
Yeah, the source describes them as a group pushing forward with something called specialty life creation, an agenda that Lugalis eventually acts to halt.
Specialty life creation.
Yeah.
Like more genetic engineering. Or something else.
It's ambiguous in these notes what exactly the Order of the Self is. Are they a faction within the KA, another alien group, a philosophical movement? It isn't fully spelled out here, but their goal is definitely presented as something inherently problematic, something dangerous that needs stopping.
All right, let's just take stock of this world again. It's not the philosophical utopia from Plato's dialogues at all.
Not even close.
It's a society in the Red Sea, ruled by genetically engineered humans who are basically a military arm for these alien Nephilim. You've got the Pleiadians lurking with separate interests. You've got baseline humans being exploited potentially for their emotional energy by some kind of machine. And there's this internal group, the Order of the Self, pushing some kind of potentially dangerous bioengineering agenda.
It's a high-stakes, complex, and ethically very murky landscape.
It completely recontextualizes the whole Atlantis myth, doesn't it? That idea of uplift, if it involves genetic manipulation on one hand and emotion harvesting on the other.
It takes on a much more sinister meaning, yeah.
Yeah.
What does that say about the Nephilim's definition of progress? Is this benevolence? Or is it just a really sophisticated form of resource extraction or control? It forces you to question the nature of the relationships between all these species.
Absolutely. And right at the center of Lugalis's professional life in this complicated world is this one monumental engineering task, the transport device and its hangar complex.
This was it. This was the absolute core of his mandate as chief engineer. The transport device, the TD, was designed for non-chemical transport between the surface and that orbiting space station.
So no rockets.
No rockets. Its purpose was getting people and aliens, presumably Nephilim, maybe others, to and from Earth efficiently, bypassing traditional space travel methods entirely.
And the hangar was the essential ground infrastructure for this thing. The source gives a visual cue for its location.
Yeah, it was excavated from the south side of a massive mesa and positioned so its opening, maybe a huge door or portal area, ended directly inside a lake at the base of the cliff face.
Inside a lake. Okay, that sounds complicated structurally.
Yeah, implies complex water management or sealing issues right from the get-go. And the source states Lugalis's primary directive was singular and urgent. Get this transport device installed, get it activated, and get it into near continuous operational use.
Time pressure.
Seems like intense time pressure, yeah. Especially given what we learned later about the Nephilim's plans.
But the source highlights one specific, almost unbelievable requirement for the hangar construction, particularly the floor.
Ah, yes, the floor. This is where the engineering challenge feels truly alien to our current understanding. The hangar floor preparation had this almost impossible-sounding specification.
Which was?
It had to be flat, level, and perfectly smooth.
Perfectly smooth. Okay, smooth is one thing, but perfectly...
Exactly. And this wasn't for, like, a small lab table. This covered an immense area, roughly 30 yards wide by 120 yards long.
That's huge. Like bigger than a football field, lengthwise.
Yeah. And this area was needed to accommodate the transport device itself, which was specified as being 30 feet wide by 300 feet long. So a massive device needing a massive, perfectly prepared surface.
Perfectly smooth. Over an area that size, the source specifically notes that this required a degree of flatness not seen even in modern technology today, right?
It explicitly says that.
Yeah.
A level of precision engineering on a massive scale that's apparently beyond our current capabilities.
So while Lugalis had his workforce doing the actual, digging and building,
he was the one responsible for figuring out how. Devising the methods, troubleshooting the inevitable problems, and ensuring this unprecedented standard was actually met. This wasn't just managing builders. It sounds like it required innovating techniques for precision far beyond what we can currently even conceive of.
Imagine facing that as an engineer. A construction requirement that sounds like science fiction to us, needed for a machine that does, what? Teleportation, anti-gravity travel.
Not like that, yeah.
What kind of materials, what tools, what processes could possibly achieve that level of perfect smoothness across such a vast area? It really forces you to think about technology operating on fundamentally different principles than ours.
It definitely underscores that even within this high-tech framework, the engineering challenges could be incredibly specific and monumentally difficult.
Yeah.
It wasn't all effortless magic.
Right. Okay, so beyond the massive engineering projects and the heavy political maneuvering, the source also gives us these glimpses into Lugalis's personal life, particularly his relationships with his wives and daughters. Adds more layers to his character sketch.
He does. It mentions that over his extended lifespan, remember, we're talking potentially millennia.
Right, the 10,000 plus years.
He had multiple wives, sometimes concurrently, sometimes overlapping, which is another detail suggesting a social structure around relationships quite different from what we might consider typical today.
Yeah, definitely. And one early wife is particularly highlighted, isn't she? Nikia.
Nikia, yes. Her departure, as it's described in these pages, is really enigmatic and dramatic.
What happened?
The source says she left him out of disgust, and this happened shortly after he was installed as the new chief engineer.
Out of disgust about him taking the job. Or something else.
It's not entirely clear from the notes, but it adds that she exercised the free agent status of women in Atlantis society.
Free agent status. What does that imply?
It suggests a degree of autonomy, maybe, an ability for women to make independent choices about their relationships, perhaps leave partnerships, even within this otherwise rigid authoritarian system. It's an interesting little contrast mentioned there.
It is, and the source creator even adds a comment about this part of the story.
Yeah, a bit of meta-commentary. Notes that describing the specifics of their breakup is kind of a weak point in this current sketch. Speculates it might relate more to unresolved issues from past lives rather than, say, current life jealousy or external interference.
Past lives again keeps cropping up.
It does. But there's a specific scene, detailed like a potential film sequence, showing the breakup.
Okay, paint the picture.
It's a fight, apparently on a wharf or a dock. Nikia is telling Lugalis about her deep displeasure with him, maybe with the situation, and her decision to leave him. The source even includes potential directorial notes, like a camera angle looking over LG's right shoulder, focusing on Nikia.
Very cinematic.
And then the scene gets weird.
How so?
Nikia uses something described as a torch-like device. She shines it onto the stonework of the dock, and it displays images. The source creator speculates this might be something like a handheld video projector.
A projector, okay.
Yeah.
Showing him what? Memories, evidence.
The source doesn't say what the images were, frustratingly. But it's a curious piece of tech for such a personal, dramatic moment. Then she hands the device to Lugalis.
Okay.
And asks him to shine it on her. She turns her back, and the source creator explicitly likens this pose to the back view of the woman in that painting, Nike, by Eugene Berman, kind of a specific visual reference.
Nike. Okay.
As she walks towards some steps leading away from the dock, Lugalis does as she asked. He shines the light on her, and according to the source's description, she just goes poof and vanishes.
Poof, like literally poof.
That's the word used in the notes. Poof.
And disappears. Okay, that's not a projector anymore. That's incredibly abrupt and mysterious. What were those images she showed him? What did they mean? And her disappearance, teleportation, dissolution, some kind of tech integrated into her.
The source just leaves it hanging there, a dramatic, completely unresolved exit.
Wow. That adds a huge layer of intrigue to his personal history, doesn't it? And hints at technology or abilities far beyond just the big engineering stuff. Makes you wonder about the true capabilities present in this world, even on a personal level.
It really does. Forces you to question what was actually possible there. Now, another wife is mentioned, Lucor, and she seems to play a very different role.
More supportive.
Yes. Lucor is noted as being present during significant later events. And the source specifically highlights her role in offering comfort and support to Lugalis during a moment of really profound despair he experiences at the hangar, which we'll definitely get to. Her presence is portrayed as one of quiet, understanding support.
Okay, so a contrast to the dramatic exit of Nikia and then his daughters.
Twin daughters. And the source gives them a very specific, almost cosmic purpose.
Which was?
They were apparently born with a mission from God. Their intended role was nothing less than to fundamentally change the character of Atlantean society, specifically to prevent these schism issues that were causing internal division and problems.
Wow, save the world, basically.
That seems to be the idea.
Yeah.
But tragically, the source notes, they ran out of time. Their mission was incomplete when Atlantis ultimately fell.
Oh, wow. So close, but not enough time.
Yeah.
So Lugalis' personal world, it's marked by these complex relationships, A mysterious departure shrouded in weird tech, a supportive partner later on, and children who had this failed divine mandate to save their entire world.
It's a lot of personal baggage and high stakes.
Definitely. These relationships aren't just background color. They really underscore the personal pressures on him within this already high-pressure environment. That free agent status for women is fascinating against the authoritarian backdrop. And Nakia's exit, that just leaves a huge question mark hanging over his past.
It does. And the idea that his own kids were meant to fix the societal flaws that he was part of ruling, that adds a really tragic dimension to his family life, doesn't it?
For sure. And these intertwined pressures, professional, political, personal, they seem to converge in these moments of intense crisis that are outlined in the source. One of them is when he gets called up to the orbital space station.
Right. Topside, as the source calls it. Aboard that synchronous orbit station where the crucial peer device for the transport system was housed. And the setting described is striking.
How so?
It's drawn as being similar to the war room from the movie Dr. Strangelove.
Ah, okay. I can picture that. Big round table.
Exactly. Large round table, intense overhead lighting, in a generally dimly lit, serious room. High tension.
And who's there?
Lugalis, presumably the other two council members. And then, into the center of this table, a 3D image projection appears.
A hologram.
Seems like it. Of the chief Nephilim Anunnaki, who is responsible for overseeing the surface operations on Earth. And the reason for this meeting becomes immediately clear.
Bad news, I'm guessing.
Very bad news for LG. His progress on getting the transport device fully operational is deemed too slow. And this is apparently threatening the Nephilim's ability to use it for their critical last flight out plan.
Last flight out. Okay, that sounds ominous, like an evacuation.
That's the implication. And the chief Nephilim's image, just as Lugalis is about to sit down, seems to see him, focus on him. It points this rigid, sharp appendage described chillingly in the notes as being like a sword or lance directly at him across the table.
Points a weapon-like appendage at him. Intimidating.
Extremely. And the accusation is leveled. Malfeasance.
Yeah.
Insufficient progress. The source describes this not as a calm discussion, but as a shouting, demeaning rant directed straight at Lugalis.
And can he defend himself? Explain the difficulties with the, perfectly smooth floor, maybe.
He tries. The source notes he attempts to offer defense, explain the issues, but the rant just continues unabated. He's shouted down. And the consequences for this kind of failure in KA's society, as the source explains them, were absolutely brutal.
Yeah, brutal.
The source states unequivocally, that kind of public dressing down, especially from a high-ranking Nephilim, it normally carried an implicit death sentence.
Death sentence? Just for being slow on a project.
Apparently so. And not just for the individual. The source says it extended, by societal rule, to their entire family.
The whole family.
Siblings, cousins, parents, the whole lineage. The source does note there were rare exceptions. Maybe if a particularly skilled relative could step in and fill the vacancy, they might be spared. But the default expectation, total family annihilation for the individual's failure.
My God, that's horrifying.
It paints a picture of an incredibly ruthless system. The source mentions the other council heads present in the war room are described as just squirming, terrified they might be next.
I bet. So after enduring this public, terrifying, and potentially fatal dressing down, Lugalis returns to the surface.
Yeah, and the source follows him. He goes to the hangar complex after hours when it's completely empty of the workforce. He's described as being in just a state of deep gloom in his heart and mind. Utter despair.
Where does he go in the hangar?
He makes his way to the south opening of the massive hangar, the part that overlooks the lake at the base of the mesa cliff. He sits down right on the edge, his legs dangling over the precipice.
Oh, no.
And the source explicitly states he is contemplating suicide.
Because of the death sentence.
Exactly. In the absolutely brutal logic of this society, ending his own life right then and there by jumping into the lake might be the only way he could possibly preempt the Nephilim's execution order. And maybe, just maybe, mitigate or even avoid the horrific consequences for his entire extended family.
It's a moment of just absolute nadir, isn't it? The weight of his professional failure, the systemic cruelty he's caught in, and the potential destruction of everyone he's related to, all crashing down on him at once.
It really highlights the extreme stakes he was operating under, and the, frankly, morally bankrupt nature of the rule he served. His contemplation of suicide isn't just presented as despair. It's framed within the source as a grim, tactical calculation within a system that offers absolutely no mercy for failure.
But in this moment of solitary despair, he wasn't entirely alone, was he? Though he didn't realize it at first.
No. His wife, Lucor, had secretly followed him.
Lucor, the supportive one.
Yes. She appears and sits down beside him on the edge on his left side. And the source describes her recognizing, she couldn't magically fix the impossible situation he was in. There were no easy words.
Right.
But she could simply be there for him. She places her right arm over his neck and shoulders, this gesture of quiet comfort, just offering silent support as he grapples with his potential fate and the terrible choice he feels he has to make.
And the source adds a camera note here, too.
It does, yeah. Mentions the camera view is from behind them, a diagonal shot looking at them, sitting there on the edge, really emphasizing their vulnerability and isolation in that huge, empty space.
A very human moment, despite the alien context. But then the source adds another element. Something else is happening.
Something neither Lugalis nor Lucor are aware of. It reveals that a hidden angel had appeared, somewhere out beyond the hangar opening, over the lake, perhaps.
An angel, like wings and Halo angel.
This source just says angel. And this angel was doing something with a wand.
Doing something with a wand. Okay. That throws a whole different light on things.
It absolutely does. It introduces this supernatural or perhaps incredibly advanced, maybe benevolent force into a narrative that's mostly been about technology, alien politics, and human-like drama up to this point.
What was the angel doing? Was this divine intervention, a subtle nudge, a blessing, protection? How might this connect to him eventually being able to complete that impossible hangar floor, or maybe to that mention of spirit later on?
We don't know from these notes, but it strongly suggests that this story operates on multiple levels simultaneously, not just the material and political, but potentially the spiritual or cosmic as well. It leaves this powerful, mysterious image hanging in the air, suggesting unseen forces are observing, maybe even influencing, the fate of this world and its chief architect.
And indeed, the story does proceed. Despite the insane technical challenges, despite that terrifying brush with annihilation, the source confirms that eventually, the incredibly difficult hangar floor preparation is successfully completed.
Success. Against seemingly impossible engineering standards. Maybe thanks to that unseen angelic help. Or maybe just through sheer relentless effort and Lugalis' ingenuity, perhaps spurred on by the near-death experience.
Whatever the reason, they did it. And this achievement is marked by a significant event.
A commissioning ceremony.
Yeah.
Held right inside the completed hangar.
And this ceremony gives us another glimpse into the diverse cast of characters involved in this Atlantis, right?
Yeah.
Who attended.
It was quite a gathering. The KA council members were there, of course.
Yeah.
Various Nephilim representatives. And significantly, the source notes, one representative of the Pleiadians.
Just one. Interesting. Still keeping their distance, maybe?
Or perhaps that one carried significant weight. Also present were a collection of other aliens, some described as being in spacesuits.
And there's a specific description of one suit.
Yeah, quite visually specific. Like an ice cream cone with a transparent half-sphere on top.
An ice cream cone suit. Oh,
The source adds that while the top half-sphere was transparent, you couldn't clearly make out the alien's face inside. Adds a bit of mystery.
and Lugalis' role in the ceremony.
He officiates. He thanks his staff, formally welcomes the visitors. The source compares its importance to something like a modern ship launching ceremony, a major milestone.
So the hangar is finally ready, which means the next crucial step could happen.
Bringing down the transport device itself from the orbital station.
And the method described for this, again, really highlights the advanced nature of their tech.
Yeah, it wasn't like, a capsule crashing down with parachutes or a fiery re-entry.
Mm-hmm.
The device, which was unoccupied at this point, was controlled remotely by Lugalis.
How?
Using his personal staff device.
A staff device, like a literal staff.
Seems like it's some kind of control rod or interface. And he used this to bring the massive TD down in a controlled descent that took several days.
Several days? Why so slow?
The source explains it was achieved using the device's own anti-gravity capabilities. This allowed them to essentially bleed off velocity and momentum very slowly, very precisely, avoiding the intense atmospheric re-entry heat that would destroy conventional craft.
So a slow, deliberate anti-gravity lowering from orbit, spanning days, controlled by one guy with a special staff?
That's the picture painted.
That's just radically different from our understanding of orbital mechanics and spacecraft recovery. It really underscores the power and sophistication of the technology Lugalis was working with and highlights his personal connection, his mastery over it via that staff device.
Definitely. And even as this major event, the TD descent, was happening, the source notes that other related chores within the huge hangar complex were still ongoing, Finishing touches, maybe, systems integration, suggests it was a massive, multifaceted project right up to the end.
Okay, all of these events, the challenges, the personal drama, the successes, they're all building towards the ultimate dramatic turn in Lugalis Sidgmal's story, as it's sketched in these initial pages.
Right. And the source is very clear about his initial alignment. At first, Lugalis was fully on board with the Nephilim's goals.
He wanted them to succeed.
Yes. He wanted their migration plan and their uplift duties to succeed. And the source explicitly notes this include his supporting the emotion harvesting of baseline humans. He was initially a product of this system, working towards its objectives, even the really ethically questionable ones.
Okay, so he starts as a loyal, high-ranking operative, but then a radical transformation occurs.
A complete flip. The source describes it as him doing a 180. His primary concern shifts entirely.
From what to what?
Instead of Nephilim success, his focus becomes the well-being of humanity, the baseline humans specifically pitted against the interests of the Pleiadians.
Ah, so the Pleiadians become the antagonists in his view, or at least their interests clash with humanity's.
That seems to be the implication of his shift. This is the absolute core of his narrative arc as presented here. Something happens. Maybe it was the Nephilim's brutality he witnessed firsthand, maybe glimpses of the Pleiadian agenda. Perhaps that mysterious angel's intervention had a deeper effect, or just a growing internal realization sparked by all the pressures he faced.
Something clicked.
Something clicked, and he completely changed allegiance. From serving the alien system that created his people, he turns to protect the very unenhanced humans that system was exploiting.
And this massive change in allegiance, this 180, it leads directly to his final devastating action, the act that defines his role in the ultimate fate of Atlantis.
He brings about the destruction of the island of Atlantis itself.
He destroys it. The chief engineer, the chief builder, destroys his own creation.
That's what the source material indicates. His ultimate act is one of destruction.
Why? What did that achieve, according to the source?
It apparently had two primary consequences. First, it halted the otherwise uncheckable progress of that group, the Order of the Self.
The ones pushing specialty life creation.
Exactly. Whatever dangerous path they were on, destroying Atlantis stopped it cold.
Okay. And the second consequence?
Immense, total personal sacrifice. By destroying Atlantis, he sacrificed everything. His family Lucor, his daughters, his friends, his coworkers, the entire society he knew, his entire world.
And himself.
And ultimately himself. He went down with it. But the source adds one more layer to this.
Which is?
That this drastic step, this catastrophic act of destruction and self-sacrifice also satisfied the desires of spirit.
Spirit, with a capital S, okay? That connects back potentially to the angel, or suggests some larger cosmic design or imperative.
It certainly seems to. His final act isn't portrayed merely as sabotage or rebellion. It's presented as a necessary, albeit catastrophic, sacrifice. One that prevented a different kind of potentially worse, uncheckable danger posed by the Order of the Self, and somehow aligned with a higher purpose, with spirit.
It makes his story just a profound tragedy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. An engineer who builds and sustains a world, faces impossible demands, suffers personal despair within this brutal system, and then ultimately chooses to destroy that entire world from within. All, apparently, to protect the very beings his former masters were exploiting, paying the ultimate price, and fulfilling some kind of spiritual imperative in the process.
It raises some really intense questions, though, like, what was so dangerous about this specialty life creation that it necessitated wiping an entire civilization off the map to stop it?
We don't get the details in these excerpts, but the implication is that it was an existential threat of some kind.
And how does his personal sacrifice, the loss of everything he built, everyone he knew and loved, weigh against preventing the uncheckable progress of the Order of the Self? It's a scale of consequence that's just hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. And that idea that this pleased spirit, it transforms his act, doesn't it? From maybe just rebellion or desperation into something potentially predestined or aligned with the cosmic balance. It makes his sacrifice feel less like a personal choice and perhaps more like a necessary function within a much larger unseen plan.
A heavy thought. Finally, these initial pages, they leave us with these tantalizing glimpses of even more complexity, more mystery, lurking within the full story, right?
They do. The source briefly lists other events that are part of the larger narrative sketch, but aren't detailed in these particular excerpts we've been discussing. really highlights that this is just a snapshot.
What kind of events?
Things like the Words of a Stranger event at a topside meeting.
Words of a stranger? Who? Saying what? Intriguing.
Exactly. Also, evening services, aspirants, which sounds maybe religious or spiritual.
Aspirants, like people trying to achieve something. Enlightenment, uplift.
Could be. And then, most intriguingly perhaps, a visit by a man from the future.
Whoa, okay. A man from the future. That just blows the doors wide open, doesn't it? Time travel, temporal manipulation involved in this whole Atlantis saga.
It certainly throws that possibility right into the mix.
So these brief mentions, the stranger's words, the aspirant services, the time traveler, they serve as these powerful hooks. They remind us that the complex world we've just sketched, Atlantis, the Nephilim, Pleiadians, the Order of the Self, Lugalis' whole story, it might just be the tip of an even larger narrative iceberg, one that potentially involves time itself and maybe deeper spiritual dimensions we haven't even touched on.
They definitely suggest the conflict isn't just limited to the present moment of Atlantis' existence in the Red Sea, but might span vast stretches of time and involve interactions on levels way beyond the purely physical or political that we focused on. Leaves you wondering what other secrets this really unique vision of a fallen civilization holds.
Absolutely. Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive into these initial pages of Alan Lee Whiteman's Lugalis Sidgmal side of the story of Atlantis, we've explored a truly reimagined Atlantis.
Yeah, located in the Red Sea, connected to orbit, built and ruled by these genetically enhanced humans, the Ka Anunnaki, under the sway of the alien Nephilim.
With competing interests from the Pleiadians and that dark reality of potential emotion harvesting targeting baseline humans.
We've spent time with Lugalis Sidgmal, LG, the chief engineer, this figure of immense, complex, often contradictory responsibilities, juggling architecture, civil and electrical engineering, political power on that three-seat council, administration of a moneyless society, and scientific troubleshooting, possibly growing on past lives.
He faced those unprecedented engineering challenges, like that perfectly smooth hangar floor for the anti-gravity transport device.
We touched on the personal dimensions, too. The mysterious high-tech departure of his first wife, Nikia, the quiet support of his later wife, Lucor, and that tragic, incomplete mission of his twin daughters, who were meant to avert the society's collapse.
We saw the moments of extreme pressure and despair, that terrifying public condemnation from the chief Nephilim, the implicit threat of total family annihilation.
And his subsequent contemplation of suicide right there on the hangar edge, possibly observed, maybe even influenced by that hidden angel with a wand.
And we followed his radical transformation, that 180-degree shift in allegiance, turning from the Nephilim's agenda towards the well-being of humanity.
Culminating in that devastating final decision to destroy his own world, sacrificing everything and everyone he knew, including himself, to halt the uncheckable progress of the Order of the Self and somehow fulfill the desires of spirit.
And it's worth repeating, right? This material is presented as notes for film. Sketches for dramatic scenes and character arcs, not exhaustive lore.
Exactly. It's about painting a picture, setting up the drama.
Which brings us to maybe a final provocative thought for you, drawn from the absolute heart of Lugalis' journey and his ultimate act. Consider the weight of the impossible choices he faced. He was embedded deep within this system of alien rule, wielding technology beyond our current comprehension. When he became convinced of what he saw as an even greater, uncheckable danger, this specialty life creation from the Order of the Self, he chose total destruction, annihilation, and self-sacrifice.
What does it mean, really, to fight for humanity's well-being when your adversaries are technologically superior aliens on one side and maybe ethically dubious internal factions pushing dangerous science on the other? And the cost of fighting is the complete annihilation of your own civilization, your family, your friends, and yourself.
Does knowing the potential horrific outcome of inaction, like the unchecked progress of whatever the Order of the Self was doing and maybe the continuation of that emotion harvesting under the Nephilim, does that truly justify the immense, devastating cost of his final desperate act?
His story, as sketched here, really challenges you to think about the nature of power, the extreme limits of sacrifice, and the terrifying burden of knowledge when the future of a species, or maybe multiple species, is on the line, all framed within a vision of Atlantis that is profoundly different from any you've likely encountered before.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the initial pages of the story of Lugalis Sidgmal.